Welcome back, everyone. Very excited for the next hour of our event today. Before I turn it over to our keynote speaker, I want to remind everyone, please drop your name in the chat box so we know that you're here today. And also, we will be doing a Q&A at the end of this session. So if you have any questions, even if it's early on, please put them out there and I will come back in and I will be answering all questions. I will announce we've had 2 winners for those prizes that we're giving away today. So after the keynote speaker, I will announce the names of the people that are visiting the sponsors every hour on the hour. So today I have Anthony Johnson. He's a former CISO at multiple Fortune 100 companies and currently the managing partner at Delve Risk. He's led the largest global cybersecurity programs in the financial services and is a passionate advocate for addressing the issues of diversity and inclusion within the IT domains. He also was a former guest on my weekly radio show and Security for All, which you could go to Voice America and on the Business Network and check out any of our past speakers, and you can check him out on there. Happy to have him back. Today we are going to be speaking on cybersecurity, the evolving landscape, and what business oriented really means. So welcome to the show, Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Happy to see you here again. And I won't take up a lot of time because I know you have a lot to talk about. So I'll just throw it over to you.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. I see that we have I want to make sure we're not muted on the main screen here. We're good to go.
You're good to go.
Awesome. So let me jump into this. Really appreciate the time from everybody. I'm excited to talk about the topic today. What you'll find is that whenever I do a presentation, I try to make sure that it's not the classic cybersecurity. Let's just talk about segmentation or auditor components. So just know that going into this presentation, and let's jump into it here. So hello, FutureCon. Like I said, I'm really jazzed about today, and the topic, like Kim mentioned, is the evolving landscape and what business oriented really means. This is something that's really important to me, and it's important for a number of reasons. Because when I was a sitting CISO, and I'll go into a little bit of background myself. When I was a sitting CISO, and over the course of the last 5-10 years, you've heard this term more and more: business oriented. We have to be business oriented. And it's been really funny because I think I'm of the belief that words matter. The words specifically that we use, the definitions, how we use them, and the intent, and the context. And I think that we as security leaders and IT practitioners have generally been using this, or maybe in the wrong manner, maybe not understanding or thinking about it. So before we get into the presentation, though, I always found this to be an important piece. I was giving a talk one time, and it was actually the worst slide I ever had in my life. I was talking about cybersecurity, and I was following Jay Leno interviewing Colin Powell. And Jay Leno says, "Hey, this man needs no introduction. Here's Colin Powell." And Colin Powell walks up and he goes, "Well, I think it's important for people to know a little bit about my background besides just the name." So I'm going to do the same thing and just give you a little bit of background of why you should listen to me on this topic, and we'll hopefully that gives you some insight and context. So my background: I started off as a hands-on practitioner in the U.S. Air Force. Let me slide over here. In the U.S. Air Force, and really learned the nuts and bolts of technical packet analysis and deep insights, and then moved into being a CISO at a number of companies: GE Treasury, Fannie Mae. I was the global CISO for the corporate investment bank at JP Morgan. Was a deputy over at Cap One, and for the last few years, I've actually been building a company where I'm the managing partner and founder, Delve Risk. And what we do is we study the largest enterprises. So the 1,500 largest companies out there, and our customers are actually sales and marketing teams, so cybersecurity sales and marketing teams. I say all of this to really give you some insight in that it's not just one paradigm that I'm speaking from. It's based on experience. It's based on talking to a tremendous number of CISOs on a weekly basis. Some cases that I still mentor or coach, and it's also based on a lot of the research of what we're seeing. As a market research company, again, studying all these companies and security leaders. So let's get into it. Business oriented, like I mentioned, is a really it's been this almost trigger word for me a little bit here, and make sure I slide over here. There we go. And it's important because there are a lot of people who use the word but actually don't know what it means. And as IT practitioners, we often have really different definitions. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm business oriented," you don't actually understand oftentimes what that actually means, and the nuances of that term. So one of the important things, I'm going to jump into this Psych 101 view. So we'll start off with a little bit of psychology here. Abraham Maslow. He's considered the founder of considered one of the founders of humanistic psychology. And you're probably like, okay, what does humanism and humanistic psychology have to do with cybersecurity and business? Just give me a little bit of rope. We'll get there really quickly here. But let's talk about what the definition of humanism is. Um, when Maslow started to pull this together, one of the definitions here was an ethical responsibility to lead lives that are fulfilling or personally fulfilling, while also contributing to the greater good. This definition actually has made its way into the corporate space in a really, really profound way, right? You'll often hear people talk about, hey, companies are allowed to make a profit, but they have to contribute to society. It's not just about the profit. It's not just about making money. And now I'm not arguing the merits of whether that's good, bad, or right or wrong, but it's a reality that we live in that companies have often adopted this view of where they really look at this perspective of saying, how do we think about what we're doing and how we add value to our society, to our ecosystem, not just from the aspect of a particular good product or service, but how does it impact the rest of the world? And there are a lot more companies that are popping up that actually have this notion of fulfilling a greater good as part of the core thesis, right? Sometimes they'll weave this into their mission statements, which is just a whole nother topic. I like to talk about the value and importance of those. But the thing here is that this notion of contributing to the greater good, living lives that are fulfilling, has really spawned and been adopted in large parts by corporate America. So here's something else Maslow created, though. This is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this is one of my favorite images to really use when we talk about what businesses are doing, what we should be doing as cyber professionals, because oftentimes as practitioners, we think our job is to lock it down, to secure the world, and I think it's important and valuable for us to add value, rather, to secure the world, to secure the company. But we have to look at it in the context of how this pyramid structured here, right? So let's look at the people side. When it comes to people, when it comes to us as humans, animals, whatever, there is a need, and this is particularly around people, but there are a set of needs, of those physiological needs, things that we need to survive. So we look at things like food, water, warmth, rest. Shelter is sometimes considered there, but it's all usually considered more in the safety component, right? But the physiological needs, the basic needs, are really around what does it take to live, right? And then we get into the next tier. So once you've got the food, once you've got water, once you're warm and you can sleep, then you can get into the aspect of, I'm worried about my safety. Am I safe where I'm at? Am I going to live through the night now that you've actually been able to live through the day here? And then after you achieve that, you get to go to the next level. And that next level really looks at that belongingness and love needs, right? Relationships and friends. And then you continue to move up the pyramid and you get into the actual aspects of prestige, feeling of accomplishment, that self-actualization, who you are. Of have you arrived as an individual, if you will, here. Now, when we think about businesses have very similar pyramid structure here, right? Except that the physiological needs of, instead of the company needing food, water, warmth, and rest, they need revenue. Without revenue, they cannot survive. And this is often lost on us when we work in large enterprises, because we walk into an environment that has largely solved a lot of these physiological needs. They're not in the fight or flight, we have to make enough revenue to survive mode. They usually have enough revenue, they usually have enough of the necessary components, and they're working across the rest of this hierarchy, right? Where security, the safety and security, really sits at the next tier. And then we get into, you'll see a lot of these inclusive initiatives, inclusion initiatives, diversity and inclusion components, which I'm a really, really big proponent of, and I've helped to push throughout my career. But it's after security and safety, right? Then we get into the actual aspect of like, how do we have different senses of community, and how are we changing the world for good? A really fun example, a good example that I like to use are really some of the mega organizations that we have today, right? Google, when they first started, yes, they had the mantra and corporate mission statement of doing good, but without those aspects of the right level of revenue and growth, they couldn't actually achieve anything else further up the stack. Amazon, if they weren't able to sell books in its early days, they never would have been able to grow enough to be able to achieve a number of their corporate initiatives that they really sponsor, that are changing the world. Now, whether you're an Amazon fan or not, but it's just an important component to realize that this stack, this hierarchy of needs, really holds true for people and business if you just slightly look at it from a little bit of a different paradigm here. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So what does this mean for in the context of this talk here? One of the pieces, and where I mentioned earlier that we use the different, we don't have a standard definition for business oriented. This is generally what I'm talking about. Let me slide out of the way here. Hopefully, there we go. Perfect. When people in business talk about business oriented, or when we think about the actual definition of the term, there are generally 4 or 5 types of being business oriented. The first is production oriented, and then there's product oriented, marketing oriented, or sales oriented. Production oriented is really focused on how do we make sure that we are producing the goods, realizing a lower cost, maintaining efficiency levels, and really just optimizing that process, that delivery chain. Product oriented from a business, if you're business oriented but product focused, you're looking at optimizing the product. How do you drive innovation into the product? How do you make it the next generation? You're adding the next set of features, functionalities, capabilities that your consumers, customers, the market are really going to want. Marketing is really looking at how do we get market share? How are we getting market awareness about what we're doing? And how do we make sure people know about the company, about the product? But this is very, very different from just saying we're building and focus on building a great product. And then finally, sales. And if somebody is sales oriented or business oriented sales, they're really focused on driving sales. Their objective is to maximize those deal opportunities, to close as many deals as possible. They're relying on the marketing components, of course, but their objective is to actually drive hardline sales, top line growth, as opposed to the to margin or net revenue. This is actually a dimension of business oriented that cybersecurity professionals seldom talk about. And there's some good reason. The reason is that most business oriented IT folk focus on being production oriented. When we think about this, it actually makes a lot of sense here, right? Part of the reason it makes sense is that IT has a history of having been viewed oftentimes as a utility. Now, I think that's changing. We'll talk about that just a little bit here. But when we look at this, IT has historically looked at been considered like a utility service, where you walk in, you turn the lights on. You don't think about the lights. You don't think about the massive aspect of technical innovation that has had to happen to enable just turning the light on and it just magically appears. And security is kind of viewed in the same way, right? You have a lot of business leaders who are like, hey, I just want to be able to turn security on. It just secures stuff and we're off to the races. And so IT and security leaders tend to focus on this aspect of business oriented, but it's not a deliberate decision. You will find some CISOs, some IT leaders who instead are actually focused more on the product side. Now you'll find this more on earlier stage, mid-level organizations where they're trying to drive some aspect of pure innovation here, where they're really looking to do the step up. You'll definitely see this in earlier stage cybersecurity companies, IT and application solution companies. In very, very few cases will you see the IT function really helping on the marketing side, being business-oriented marketing. But in other cases, you'll see them a lot. Security leaders, especially at product companies, are business-oriented but helping to drive sales. So when a CISO for a company shows up as part of a sales meeting or a sales deal, that's where you know that they're really coming into this from that sales perspective. And this was a fascinating experience for me. At JP Morgan, I would actually bounce between, of course, the production business-oriented, and in some cases, the sales business-oriented as we worked with, the investment bank clients, winning deals, et cetera. And it's just a very, very important dynamic to really consider of what type of business-oriented are you talking about when you say, hey, I'm going to be business-oriented, or somebody says they are business-oriented. What does this look like? And this gets into the first challenge I would have for everybody. Let me slide back over, which is to really be deliberate here, right? To what does this look like from a sense of being business oriented for you? It's really dangerous to accidentally do something in a company, doing something in a company. I say this from a bit of experience of going from, Fortune 100 CISO to a startup founder, because the accidents just end up getting you into this really weird dynamic of misdirection. And if you don't have the context of what the rest of the company is oriented on, you may find that you are production oriented when the rest of everybody else is marketing oriented that time, or they're focused on that level of innovation, or what they really realize they need to drive a lot of sales, and that's what they're looking at. So my challenge to the audience is to be deliberate in understanding and driving your business orientation. And if you can do that, and if you can get the context of the people in your company that you're working with, it's going to help you a tremendous amount, because you're going to know where they're starting from here. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure we're going to be good on time here, and we will be. So this is a small segue, but I'm bump. So business orientation meets citizen developer. So before we get into this, and I will tie this all back together here shortly. I did hopefully warn everybody that I will be using a couple of Gartner quotes. So Father, please forgive me. Nothing but love for you, Gartner. But I will be using a couple Gartner quotes, and because I think they do some great research. I think that what they're doing is really, really interesting here, and particularly around this notion and topic of a citizen developer. Over the past few years, you've seen and heard this term pop up, and it's been really, really exciting and slightly terrifying for me. Largely because it kind of changes some of the words that we've used in the past. If you think about, 10 years ago, we called everyone shadow IT. And that actually sounds really spooky. It sounds almost as if they're bad for doing the thing, which I think largely a lot of us viewed shadow IT is really bad. But now, with the term citizen developer, they are good, and it's kind of this really fascinating, terrifying thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and hopefully, maybe if you guys have some thoughts on how to wrap your head around it, you could share that with me. But it's largely the same thing for me. So let's look at the definition: an employee who creates application capabilities for consumption by themselves or others, using tools that are not actively forbidden by IT or business units. Now, there's so many crazy components about this definition and where this will continue to evolve. But let me dissect the first part here. This is they're creating capabilities, not necessarily applications, but capabilities for consumption by themselves or others. This is something that's a really, really complicated thing for security professionals to get their head around. Here's why. Because when we have end users creating compute solutions, sometimes those are fancy spreadsheets. I've seen spreadsheets, I'm sure some of you have, where they are so complicated you can't tell me they're not code. They are so in-depth and so interwoven that you pretty much need to be a developer to understand them. But they're not just used by that one person to solve one thing, because if it's a really, really great spreadsheet or tool or capability, it gets used by them and their manager and another team, and before you know it, in the blink of an eye, it's now part of your end of quarter, end of year tax filing, reporting, audit components. It's now so interwoven that you actually can't, or it's very, very difficult to pull this out. And the other problem is that in order to oftentimes to replace those things, you actually have to go buy this really complicated other solution, and that's oftentimes very expensive, and it's not custom fit like whatever these end user compute things were made for here. And then the second part of this definition that terrifies me is using tools that are not actively forbidden by IT or business units. The word actively is kind of the big flag here, and something to really look at, because it's not actually possible for IT and cybersecurity to actively forbid or actively manage all the various tools, platforms, and in ways that somebody could create an application capability. So what are we left with? As practitioners, we're left with a world of where there are an infinite number or opportunities or pathways for somebody to create a capability. We maintain the expectation by the rest of the business to secure it, but there's also an infinite number of these folks popping up. So to get into a little more detail on this here, excuse me. To get into a little more detail here, there's really three types of citizen developer kind of modes as we kind of look at it. The first is what you would look at from a no code. These are applications or capabilities that are made in a really, really easy manner. Pretty much just like making a PowerPoint presentation, right? You can quite literally drag a box over here, and that's an input field, and you can drag this here. And as these applications, these no-code solutions become easier and easier, it actually lowers the bar and makes the development and the creation capability of these tools much lower, where you don't actually have to be technical at all. Which is great from a business perspective of, hey, we want people to be creative, to help solve, maybe some of our internal processes, but it's a nightmare for IT to think about, okay, if everybody who can make a PowerPoint presentation can just now whip up apps, what does that look like? How do I think about that? And then we get into the slightly more complicated or low code. So still really easy here, right? So there might be a couple hooks, some things, and there's no endless, there's no end to the amount of videos, training that are out there for these users. And so again, if no code is slightly more, very easy, low code is slightly more complicated, and but higher risk as well, of the security teams and IT teams not actually having the full transparency of what's in there. And then we get into what's been kind of the Swiss Army knife, of course, which is they can code. Why am I mentioning people who can code in this notion of citizen developers? For a couple reasons. If we rewind to 20 years ago. Things like YouTube, the sheer content of videos, it's in the, a tremendous amount of data is in video content is uploaded on a daily basis around the world. I think the quote, if I remember right, is more information is uploaded each day than the entirety of the history of the world before, which is just a crazy amount of data and information, right? And I'm sure that's just compounding here. Why that matters is that it's easier to code. There are 20 years ago, it wasn't as easy to code. You actually had to go to take classes, or it was more in depth to get education and learning on this. Where now people are learning to code in a much easier, much more streamlined, self-service type of manner. And so we have people in college coming out of college, self-learning. You have people in finance who are actually now coding. And what's really, really fascinating here is that we're seeing more people that are actually coding than in a kind of a non-technical job than ever before. So this is, I think, the second and last Gartner quote here. Citizen developers will outnumber professional developers by 4 to 1 by 2023. It's June of 2022. When I read this quote before, it really freaked me out, because as IT practitioners, as security leaders, maybe some of you don't feel the same way, but I feel like we barely have a handle on the professional developers, and some of us don't. We're still working on those things, and then when we think about and we look at aspects like open source library dependencies, unknown library dependencies, where are the developers copying their code from? Because there is a lot of code reuse that happens, both on forums, message boards, people sharing from Gits, people pulling things down, where they're compiling components that they don't actually understand. What does that look like from that entire software supply chain piece here, right? And over the past year, we've been talking a lot about, as an industry, SBOM and software supply chain. But when you compound this with the volume of citizen developers that are popping up, who can now code, who are no longer restricted to IT, you add in the fact and ease of no code and low code applications, we get into a whole new world of potential risk, pain, and ultimately it's a big challenge. So there's a question came up. Let me go ahead and just try to answer that here. If they're not actively forbidden by IT, are they breaking any rules? They are teetering that line. I think it's actually a really, really, really great question. And if we jump back to this whole notion of what are we trying to do as IT professionals, we can't really make a rule for everything. It's kind of like being a parent, right? You can't necessarily just make a massive set of rules for everything, although we often try. But I would say they're probably not breaking any rules if they're not active, if the thing isn't actively forbidden here, right? Because one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that they are working to solve a business problem. They're working to somehow make the company move faster, focus on production orientation, that product orientation. Maybe it's going to help them with their sales models or customer acquisition or even marketing automation. So I would say they're probably not breaking the rule, but they may be breaking the intent of what we're looking to do here, right? And if we get too restrictive, we end up in a world of where cyber and security goes back into that world of no, where we're not actually really helping the company to focus on helping them to grow, which is again going back to this business orientation. If we're not sales oriented, maybe we're not trying to help them grow. Maybe we do need to focus on them being production oriented, or maybe we should be spending time with them, the rest of the business, and helping them to look at the product orientation to get the next generation service or capability out there. Which leads into this, which is that they're everywhere. These citizen developers are everywhere, and probably the best analogy that I can think of is around 2006, 2007, when smartphones started to really come into bear. I think the iPhone came out in 2007, 2008. I'm sure somebody could correct me. Everybody in cyber said, nope, not on my watch. We're not going to let these devices on our network. You know, no bring your own device, no BYOD. You have to have a corporate phone. Everyone's just going to get two phones. And that quickly went away. It quickly turned into well, nobody really wants to carry two phones. It's a lot easier if they can, we got to meet the users where they are. And now we are in a world of, not only are we talking about personal phones of, being on the network or having access to corporate resources or data. Now we have, we're in a world of where people literally are working from home in massive ways, where they do not want to go back to the office, where it's a completely different dynamic of how we think about securing a physical location. Shoulder surfing, that's not even a thing to really talk about anymore, because you can't protect against shoulder surfing when 50, 70, 80% of your workforce is no longer in an area that you actually control. And this is ultimately especially true for citizen developers here, right? How do we know that it's actually the person who works for the company who built the thing for us? We don't, right? They may have a friend who did it, or they may outsource it, or they may tap somebody on Fiverr to say, hey, I need this thing here. Let me just give you some data sets and walk you through this, and then you can build me something. So not only are we looking at this aspect of no code, low code, or code, we're now looking at the aspect of a massive proliferation of not just data capabilities, but the creation of these capabilities. So citizen developers are everywhere. They're internal to our organizations, they're external to our organizations, and it's something that we ultimately really need to figure out how we get our heads around and solve here. Which leads into this notion of compounding problems. Citizen developers aren't necessarily bad here, right? Again, they're looking oftentimes to solve a business problem here. There was a story, I want to say it was about 3 years ago, of a developer who received multiple great reviews for 2 years. It was in the news. I can't remember the name of the company, but multiple great reviews. After 2 years, the IT team the cyber team had detected a VPN connectivity coming in from China, and they shut it down. They did some research, and they found out that the developer had actually outsourced their job to somebody else in China. Now, this Chinese developer was doing a great job. They were writing the code, they were meeting the expectations, they were doing all of the things, and this developer, the person who actually worked for the company, was just taking the days off effectively for 2 years, collecting the paycheck and then paying somebody else to do the work, which really gets into this really interesting question of, was that person malicious? And I would actually say no. They just found a better, more efficient way to do their job, which is a kind of an interesting way to think about it. Now, were they unethical? Did they lie? Those are all different questions. I do find it funny that for 2 years they got rave reviews on their code quality and delivery, though. But it ties into this piece here, is that these citizen developers, generally they're not malicious. They're just trying to get their job done. They're trying to meet, exceed, add value to the organization. But they each have their own definition of what business-oriented means, right? And this is particularly challenging for security leaders, because we have to think about what is the context of this person, and what's the context of this person, and what's my decided context, and how do I add value and translate all of this back to leadership, when the marketing team is focused on automation, creating capabilities, and focused on just getting the message and word out there. Sales is trying to streamline and acquire new customers. We have an innovation team, perhaps, that's really trying to step up the organization and capabilities. And we have the rest of the company that's trying to run really efficiency. So how do I take all of that munge it into something, and then go have a conversation with the board. Because just saying business oriented doesn't capture that, right? I think that we have to look at and be really, really deliberate again in what type of business orientation we are, where we're focusing, and this has to align with the objectives of the company. And I don't mean the company, air quotes, in forever. I mean, what's the company committed to this quarter? What is the company committed to this year? Because when we go back to the higher Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that notion of revenue, right? Just to pop it back up here, that notion of the physiological needs, that aspect of revenue, it could also be growth, right? Particularly when we start getting into this whole new world that we're facing. So a slightly bigger segue, is to really look at, you know, retention challenges that we have and the economic components here of what we're all facing, dealing with, and looking at. Okay. If we've seen anything over the past 2 years, besides the ability for IT to suddenly say, hey, we could never have a remote workforce. It's going to take 3 years for us to get those projects done. And, you know, we suddenly figured it out in 4 weeks for most of the companies. If we see anything besides that, it's that retention is really, really challenging. For people to change, I want to say it's a sheer, it's like 50%. I think the last one of the polls I saw was that 50% of people are considering changing the jobs in the next year. Which is one fascinating. The notion of corporate loyalty has shifted really, really dramatically, and some for really good reason. You know, having lived or worked in Midtown Manhattan, and when I was at JP, I had an hour and 15, hour and 20 commute each way, and you know, people suddenly realizing that, hey, I don't have to commute for 2 hours a day for 10 hours, 15 hours a week anymore, not including any flight travel or anything, just a regular commute. I don't have to, you know, show up at the office, and I can maybe be more productive, or I can do my work from where I balance my life a lot more. Changing a job now is pretty much as easy as having a different Zoom link. Maybe you have a different laptop, some different login credentials, but generally, it's a much easier path now for people to shift their role. We've lost a lot of the human touch pieces, those human touch elements, like friendships at the office, you know, where you can walk by and have that quick conversation. There's a lot of great innovation, of course, that's in collaboration. I believe that's lost by not having those in-person components. But the job market is shifting, right? We're also seeing competitive compensation competition in a really, really dramatic way. There's probably 15 to 20 folks that I know that run security operations centers where they've had team members who where they've poached, and then the person has been poached back at 40, 50, 60% increases to base compensation, which is mind-blowing here, right? And it doesn't look like it's slowing down. The reality of what we look at is that we're going to have a world of where we have ultra high value organizations that can afford the top tier talent, and then more of a mid-market and SMB market that actually just can't afford those, you know, can't afford that $300,000, $400,000 salary for some of the best minds out there. So we have users, people who are making, you know, changes for their jobs. And they're changing their job. They're making changes in you know, family compensation shifts, which is great, but it's a challenge for both us as cyber practitioners, but it's also a challenge because a lot of times these users feel like what they built is theirs. And they may say, well, I built this no code or low code component. I'm just going to go ahead and take all that intellectual property, all the things that I did for job one, and bring it over to job two. If you're job two, it's a risk, definitely. From a corporate IP theft perspective, if you're job one, it's a risk definitely from a corporate IP loss perspective. And if you're a security leader at either one of those, you're trying to figure out which job you are and where does this fit in, and did any other data come along the way. Again, this talent market doesn't look like it's slowing down here. Which actually runs a little bit different in contrast to this next slide here, which is the economy isn't really pleasant right now. Let's see if I can find a good spot to hide out here. There we go. I'll just do that. There we go. And it doesn't look like it's going to get more pleasant. A lot of one of the titans of Wall Street, somebody who's really has a really great pulse on the market, is Jamie Dimon. And this is a quote that I found to be really powerful. He said a few weeks back, he said, I said there's storm clouds, but I'm going to change it. It's a hurricane. Then doesn't know whether it's going to be a minor one or Superstorm Sandy. This is really important because we haven't had a really big market impact like this since about 2008. And it's kind of unprecedented with how the market is looking, the number of companies that are really going through layoffs right now, and the number of people who are willing just to change their jobs so quickly here, right? I am a huge fan of memes. If life could just slow down, that'd be great. I think there's a lot of us that are kind of feeling this right now, particularly if you're in a sales or marketing perspective. You're looking at, hey, what does this look like? Are these organizations going to be slowing down purchasing? If you are at one of the enterprises, it really gets into more of a conversation of, are we going to be consolidating folk? Are we reducing staff? What does that mean from a data protection perspective? What does this mean for things that they've been building? And then ultimately, how does this all work over the course of the next year? Which gets us to, let's tie this all together here, right? As we think about security, and as we think about the three kind of groupings that we've kind of talked about over the last 45 minutes here so far, there are a few things that I want to really highlight. The first is that I think we have to look at this notion of business orientation in context, and it's going to be changing. It's going to be changing in some fairly dramatic ways, and we're going to see businesses and organizations really vacillate between what they're focused on. In one quarter or 6-month period, it might be, efficiency, production, reducing cost. In the next quarter or 6-month period, it very well could be, hey, we have to drive top line revenue piece here. And when the companies start to look at and get focused in these motions, we kind of realize that everything else higher up the stack starts to get sacrificed. And the one thing that's probably a massive detriment to security leaders is to stomp our feet, to say, hey, that's not fair, that's not right. Because at the end of the day, if resources contract, it doesn't support the rest of the hierarchy. The rest of the pyramid, the rest of the hierarchy will have to correspondingly retract. And this is just a matter of, again, going back to the human, people, physiological needs. If I don't have enough calories to live, and that live may be defined as the appropriate level of growth demanded by investors or the market or what we've committed to. It could be whether we have enough money to make it through the quarter or through X number of quarters here. If we don't have the resources to actually survive as individuals, then we're not focused on the everything else, the feeling of belongingness, right? If I don't have enough food to eat, then I'm not worried about how good I feel about whether I've achieved my sense of self-actualization here, right? I'm worried about getting enough water or getting enough food. Companies are the same way. If the revenue and resources to an outlay, and that's an important component, if they are not aligned then we run into a situation of where security, safety, D&I, like all of these other components that are important, they take a backseat. And what you'll find is that those business orientations of efficiency and sales, or things you're going to add to top line, will take priority. And it's a really, really dangerous component for us to kind of get in the way of it here. Rationalization up the stack must occur. It's unrealistic, and this is I spend a tremendous amount of time every week talking with security leaders, and again, as a company, Delve Risk, we study the 1,500 largest enterprises, studying their cyber programs, budgets, the security leaders, and we really do this to get a sense and context of things that are going to be important to help the sales and marketing teams of cyber companies. But what we're seeing and what we're realizing is that this is a concern and top of mind for a large number of them saying, okay, how do I deal with this talent shortage? How do I deal with citizen developers? How do I deal with the economic conditions? Because I can't in good faith ask for more money when the market looks like we're going to be shrinking. We may lose market share, we may lose wallet share. And in likelihood, I'm going to have to restrict or contract my resources. I'm going to have to rationalize, my spend, maybe not backfill some of those roles. So the net here is that cyber is important, but we have to be prepared to really accommodate the most critical needs of the business. That's growth and revenue, right? In the same way that safety is important. I want to have a safe house, but I can't. That's less important than having enough food, and then less important than having enough water. And if we think about it in that context, then perhaps we as practitioners can look at what type of business orientation we need to be focused on for this quarter, this next year. What has the company committed to? And I really, really encourage people to look at your 10Ks, your Qs, any of your earnings statements, to get a sense of the direction of the organization. Because if they're committing to cost-cutting measures, you don't want to walk in and be asking for more money, right? You don't want to walk in running into a business orientation or a set of requirements or requests that run counter to the direction of what the organization is looking for. And with the economic conditions turning into a hurricane, to quote Jamie Dimon, we're not sure what the commits are going to be on a quarter by quarter basis, right? We're going to see some really, really interesting things here. So business orientation, the definition of what business oriented means is to really be flexible here, right? And I know I just have about 9 minutes left here, so I'm going to wrap up with this slide here. So I think it's important to always give some folks some takeaways, some suggestions on what to do here. One, so we've talked about psychology, we talked about citizen developer, we talked about talent, tough economy, the changing space of how we secure components. But really, it ultimately boils down to, we have to proactively decide what type of business orientation we need to be for the time period, and then flex and be flexible to what the business is pushing on, during that time period. We will see a lot of some interesting sacrifices and compromises that companies are going to make over the next year. I think Tesla announced even a 10% staff reduction, and you're seeing a lot of these layoffs starting to hit. So if they're looking for production optimization and reducing costs, it's probably not the best time for you to walk into your company asking for a number of headcount here. So get ready to context shift at an unprecedented speed and rate. So this is going to be something that's going to be really, really important. The second, though, is probably, I would say, almost the most important, is to understand how it all works. Understand how your company works. Understand how do they actually do marketing? How do they actually do sales? Again, I'm guilty of this as well. We mostly spend and mostly accidentally spend our time focused on being production business oriented. But there's these other dimensions which are really, really important. And every team across the company has a different focus of what they're looking at. But if you can understand how it all stitches together, you have a much better opportunity and better chance to then flex or pivot your resources, conversations, and have actual alignment. And in that sense, you'll truly be business oriented. And you'll truly be able to have a conversation with each one of the business leaders, with their functions, and really help to add value for the direction of the organization. And then the final thing here is to maximize automation. We can't hire our way out of this. I had a great conversation last week at RSA where somebody was talking about, well, we just need to train people, and we're gonna focus on training. Training is great. There's more training and information video content out there today for free than we could possibly imagine. We can't necessarily just hire away. There's not enough people to do this, particularly with the talent components, people shifting, a different sense of what corporate loyalty means. But we also have to look at the aspects of automation on the attacker side, right? They are not constrained or restricted by the number of any number of regulatory requirements or non-compete or non-information sharing or collusion. They will share, cheat, do everything possible to automate and increase the velocity and number of attacks. In order for us to solve this, in order for us to meet the market, we have to look for automation as well. So the third piece of my suggestion is to maximize automation, right? Search for ways that you can consolidate solutions, search for ways that you can optimize for your business environment, because you have to recognize, and we have to look at the market and realize the companies are about to lose their minds. The market is already losing its mind. Our leadership teams are going to respond accordingly. They're going to have to pivot, make different choices and sacrifices here. And so one of the most important impactful things we can do is look at automation and integration into our processes. So drive that automation, understand how it works, and of course, proactively decide what type of business orientation you are going to be as a IT or security leader. And I believe this is going to be the best way for you to add meaningful value to the organization over the next couple of years. So with that, I wanted to make sure I ended with about 5 minutes left. So thank you very much. And I don't know if there's another set of questions, but let me open it back up for Kim to come back.
Battery 100%.
All right, can anyone hear me?
Sorry, everyone. Thank you, Anthony. I know that, thank you for that. We had tons of people that were saying what a great presentation. I know you covered the question, if they're not actively forbidden by IT, are they breaking any rules? Is that teetering the line? I know you covered it a little bit.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it depends on what we view as what we're ultimately trying to add here, right? If it's like being a startup here, right? Like if somebody creates a great capability that makes that helps Delve Risk do more sales, but they didn't do it in G Suite, which is one of the core solutions that we use, am I going to be upset? No, I might be annoyed, but I'm probably going to be happier with the net outcome, right? And what we're going to find over the course of, particularly with citizen developers, like 4 to 1 is a massive number, right? If we thought we had a developer problem over the last 10, 15 years, like we got to strap in. And I think that you're going to find these IT and security leaders say, hey, that's not the way we're supposed to do that. But the heads of sales being like, yeah, but it really made this way better. And you're not going to walk that back now, right? Because the genie's out of the bottle here, right? And just wait. there will be somebody who goes on a tour showing board members how to use low code apps. And all of a sudden you're going to see, or no code apps, see people making pretty much slideshow presentations and be like, how come we can't just do this? So it's going to be a really wild ride here. I don't think they're breaking any rules. I think that they are maybe teetering the line, but they have good intentions generally.
A quick question before we wrap up, because one of the things that I've been seeing with a lot of our CISOs that have been on the show is there is a new wave of CISOs changing, leaving that role and going to positions like you and starting their own thing, stepping down because of the burnout of the CISOs. What do you foresee the future to look like in that whole burnout of CISOs? And how do you think that people should manage the, home lifestyle business, the whole, because it's.
Yeah, that's probably a really great, maybe a different topic for us to kind of dive into. I mean, across the 1,500 companies that we're studying, I'm looking at the data right now, there's almost 200 companies without a CISO enroll. And a number of them have not had a CISO enroll for 6+ months or more. And it's, you can't say that they don't care about security. They've just, decided to make a different path on what they're looking at. And, this month alone, there were, in May, there were 30 CISO moves in these 1,500 organizations, which is just fascinating, right? Now, I think we're gonna see more in June and July. It is a really interesting level of shifting that happens on a regular basis. Usually, it's cyclical early beginning of the year, not so much, but it's probably a whole conversation, though.
It is. It definitely is. And I didn't mean to put a big question like that on you, but you are the perfect example that left, the business sector and went over to your own, delve risk. So I thought you were someone that would be, had some good insight on that question.
Yeah, it's been wild. So, but yeah, it is interesting to see the number of people that are going out and shifting and trying to do that. I think we're going to see more of it, though. I think that over the security leaders who cannot context shift with the needs of the business, right? Like we've had the last 10 years of people just saying, oh, I just need more money. I need more money. That's going to change. And those security leaders will find new opportunities, I think.
Yeah, and sorry about my background noise. Of course, my housekeeper is right outside my door vacuuming, and there's no way for me to tell her to stop. So for all my viewers, you guys have been on the show a lot. Sorry about that. But one last thing I want to say is I also am seeing a different shift of the CISOs that have gone out on their own and now they're coming back and taking roles. So
it's hard to build a business. Thankfully, like I said, we've had a lot of success, and with some great customers, and we're doing something really new and interesting for sales and marketing orgs. But it's hard to build a business. So, well,
yeah. Well, kudos to everything that you've done. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I would say you definitely can reach out to me on LinkedIn, of course, shoot me an email, or check out our website. You can do a contact form, and just send a note there. Would love to chat with anybody, though.
All right. Well, Anthony Johnson from Delve Risk, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. Definitely, if anybody has any further questions for him, you can go up to the network lounge and you can message him there. It doesn't give your email, so don't worry about that, Anthony, but it will show up in your inbox. So you're not going to get 1,000 emails. So thank you so much. I have a couple of announcements for the next portion. So thanks, Anthony, and we will see you soon. And thanks for all your hard work you're doing out there. Okay, everyone, I have a couple of announcements for some prize winners. And this again is just for visiting our booths, our sponsors. We couldn't be here today without our sponsors. They have some great prizes, but we at FutureCon are giving away our own prizes every hour this morning. And our first winner this morning was Anthony O'Brien. He's the OT security engineer from JJ. And I have another winner is Kashana Fernando. She's an information security analyst from Sacred Heart University. So congratulations to both of you. My team at FutureCom will reach out to you so you can pick which prize that you want to win. And again, guys, everyone keep on visiting our booths so you can qualify for those prizes. We're going to take a 15-minute break now. We'll come back with our next session. And then right at the top of the hour at noon, we will kick off our CISO panel session. So right now we're on break. So please go check out all of our virtual booths. They'd love to chat with you. And I will see you shortly, everyone. Thank you.